The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
Did pro-Russian hackers compromise pipelines in Canada? Recently leaked American classified documents suggest they did. Tonight, we'll find out what's needed to secure this country's energy infrastructure. Then, as people look to make a dollar go further these days, does buying cheaper goods pay off? Also, our Ontario hubs bring us a story about how restoring graves in St. Catharines is reviving history, showing the deep roots of the Black community there. It's Thursday, April 20th, and that's ahead on the agenda. According to leaked Pentagon documents earlier this year, a Canadian natural gas company was hit in a cyber attack launched by Russian-backed hackers. The details aren't clear, but it was a wake-up call for how well-defended sensitive infrastructure is in this country. With us now for more in Belfast, Northern Ireland, Rajiv Gupta, Associate Head of the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity. In New York, Bhushan Ivaturi, Senior Vice President and Chief Information Officer at Enbridge. And in the nation's capital, Stephanie Carvin, Associate Professor of International Relations at Carleton University's Norman Paterson School of International Affairs and a former national security analyst. Welcome to you all. Rajiv, I'm going to start with you. The Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity issued a warning when the threat was first detected. What can you tell us about the incident?
Sure. We don't comment on the specifics or on alleged leaked documents, but what I can comment on is the alert that we did put out and the notification that we put out to critical infrastructure. So earlier this year, we did put out a cyber flash to critical infrastructure partners within Canada, talking about an incident that we were aware of where a critical infrastructure operator had been compromised by a threat actor. And in this situation, the threat actor had the potential to actually cause physical damage by the access that they had. So it's very important for us to flag that, to take the information that we learned from the incident and actually share that with critical infrastructure operators across Canada.
Bhushan, I want to come to you. In terms of, give us an idea, is the oil and gas sector routinely targeted by cyber criminals and state-backed leaders, or hackers rather?
Well, it is, and you know, we're being critical infrastructure always a source of attack, but I can confirm that Enbridge was not hacked or breached, and we do maintain a very strong partnership and collaboration with the government, so with the Canadian as well as the U.S. security agencies. And part of this is all about making sure that we are sharing the threat intelligence in a more proactive manner so we can take proactive action to address or mitigate any threats.
So just want to confirm that Enbridge is not the natural gas company at the center of this breach.
That is right.
All right, Stephanie. One of the last times you were on the program, we were talking about pipelines and the Colonial Pipeline in specific, one that was a successful cyber attack, a victim of. Give us an idea. Cyber criminals, do they look at oil and gas? Is this an industry that is normally targeted?
Yeah, that Colonial Pipeline attack, it's different from what this alleged attack actually is. In that particular case, it was a ransomware attack, and I don't believe it actually hit the industrial control systems or the systems that basically control the pressure, the flow, the distribution of oil. And it seems to, I think, have attacked kind of the billing department. And so it's a very different kind of attack. It's where basically criminals are able to encrypt information and then stop computers from working and those kinds of things. Then you have to pay a ransom in order to get basically your data back or access to your computers back. In this particular case, what's being alleged is something far more serious. It is something that could have potentially, as been said, caused physical destruction, right? So something that could have caused an explosion. Some of the media reports on this, a leak basically suggests that this could have potentially even have caused loss of life. So what we're talking about here is an actual kind of physical attack. And to your point, this is something that does happen regularly in the sector, or at least attempts to do this happen in the sector. We've been, I think, fairly lucky. The intelligence reports allegedly say that this would, if this if this attack had been successful, it would have been the first time we would have seen something like an industrial control system successfully attacked by Russia. But, even going back 10 years ago, there was the Telvent incident, right, which was an attack. It's allegedly China was able to actually get into the smart grid of Telvent's pipelines, which could have caused similar kinds of damage in terms of flows and things like this. That fortunately was detected and stopped at the time. But it goes to show that, these kinds of attacks, aspirational or successful, have been plotted for now well over a decade.
All right, let's add some international context into this. Rajiv, I'm hoping you can explain, how does the Russian war in Ukraine factor into these threats?
Yeah, so absolutely. I mean, the geopolitical tensions that we saw there, and then the actual conflict itself was certainly something that we tracked carefully at the Cyber Center. So, I mean, threats to oil and gas can come from a number of different sources. So they can be from cyber criminals, right? They want to make money because they can, basically ransomware a gas company and then have them pay money because they can't afford to be down. It can come from hacktivists, right? It can come from espionage. They want to learn information about the gas company or its exploration and whatnot. But in this case here, we're looking at the geopolitical context. And what states do is they tend to preposition or perform reconnaissance against oil and gas companies and other energy organizations as well. And we've been warning about that from the Cyber Center since about 2018 in our first national cyber threat assessment. So we've been upping those warnings year after year. It's a way of projection of power for the states. And when you start to get into geopolitical conflict, the stakes just rise even higher, right? So if you look back to before the conflict, in December, we had put out, this is 2021, we made a conscious effort to actually talk about ransomware. And we actually had 4 ministers sign an open letter to Canadians talking about the threat of ransomware. And as you know, there are many, ransomware groups that are Russian in this space. We actually talked about the threats to operational technologies in that December as well. So we put out a threat bulletin on threats to operational technologies. And these are the technologies that actually, have the physical ability to control things within the oil and gas industry. So as they become more and more connected to the internet, that threat surface grows and threat actors actually look at that, right? So we were very concerned about making sure that that organizations were aware of this threat. And then as we got closer to the actual conflict, which was February 24th, we were getting more and more concerned as a Cyber Center. And in January, we actually put out an urgent call saying, I believe it said the Cyber Center urges critical infrastructure operators to act. And we did put out the threat to critical infrastructure, talking about the fact that there might be repercussions from the war. And that was based off of the history, right? So in 2017, we'd seen Russia use a piece of malware called NotPetya that was meant to target Ukraine, but it really had just basically impacted about another 60 countries around the world. So it was a really indiscriminate use of malware that led to pretty severe consequences. And CSE was happy to attribute this activity to Russia and call it out along with many of our partners. So we were worried. We put out the warnings. The geopolitical context was certainly a motivation for us to up the vigilance in the critical infrastructure sectors. And we reached out to our partners who we work very closely with, because really Cyber Defense of Canada is a collaborative effort. We need to work very closely with the critical infrastructure operators, the security service providers, and that is how we defend our nation. Cyber is a little different from traditional military. It's a joint effort, and this is how we defend our country.
With all that being said, Bhushan, I want to ask you, Enbridge, one of the largest natural gas companies in North America, are you and other companies in the gas and oil sector on high alert? And what does that actually mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Rajiv covered it well, right? The context of geopolitics and the heightened threat landscape. So all that to say, critical infrastructure and energy in particular is a source of target. In Canada, in North American energy, we're a major energy provider to the world, but also not just in production, but also the potential. And we do this energy in a very responsible way. So I think it's absolutely a target. And we've got, very overt cybercrime groups in addition to nation states, such as ransomware groups that have quite declared targeting those countries, and specifically operators in Canada and the US and the NATO allies. So I think it's something that happens all the time, which really goes back to making sure that we heighten and adjust our level of capability in response to this threat landscape. So our partnership with Rajiv and Canadian, as well as the U.S. authorities, our ability to get intelligence about threats and our capabilities around 24/7 monitoring, as well as being able to take proactive actions to mitigate these threats are a key part of how we adapt and adjust to this increasing threat landscape.
Stephanie, why Canada? Why was Canada targeted?
That's such an interesting question, and it's one I'd love to know. I mean, we know that this attack happened, but we don't know why it happened or why it was a target. I mean, as Rajiv has said correctly, the Cyber Center has been warning about this for some time, that, there's a number of malicious actors that have been targeting Canada in this way, sitting on our systems, or at least trying to probe them in looking for opportunities, right? That, one day they may want to actually use them. And in fact, I believe the Cyber Center language was that may want to use them in the case of an armed conflict. Well, guess what? There's now an armed conflict that Russia very much sees us a part of. And so there's a number of questions here rather than answers. I think the first question is, was this just simply opportunistic? Did this hacking group suddenly see an opportunity to exploit this particular company and decided to take it? Or was this actually something that was ordered? And was it ordered because, Canada's not in the EU and we're certainly not the United States? I think Canada does punch above its weight in cyber, but certainly the US is still the leading country when it comes to, cyber offense, I think. So, were we kind of the low-hanging fruit, somewhat a country to be made examples of? It's not clear. We don't have answers to those questions, but none of them are particularly great. None of those are really great scenarios. I have to say, the thing that really does concern me about this group, Zarya, I think I'm saying that correctly, but they seem to have been kind of a group that defaced websites and engaged in kind of low-level hacking attacks called DDoS attacks. Now, they were becoming more sophisticated. They were using more sophisticated malware in doing so, but what's really disturbing here, and when we add this to the question of why Canada, is they seem to have upscaled their capabilities very, very quickly, right? They were part of a larger hacking group called Killnet, which was a Russian hacking group. They seem to have gone their own way, but they seem to have gained this ability. I mean, the difference between defacing a website or just blocking traffic to a website, something we actually saw here in Canada at the same time we were learning about these attacks, is it's a skill, but actually attacking a critical infrastructure and going after the industrial control systems or the supervisory control and data acquisition systems is another level. And so the fact that this group was able to skill up so quickly is, I think, pretty disturbing. Either they were able to access capabilities that they didn't previously have, or they were given some assistance or some other situation. But again, none of this is great.
I want to ask you a follow-up. Should Canada be concerned at all with its relations after this attack with the U.S. or other countries? You mentioned low-hanging fruit, but are we a weak link in that, and should that be a concern?
That's another interesting question. Of course, we're learning so much out of these intelligence leaks. We seem to be learning more from them than we normally would about our own foreign and national security policies. And one of them being that, Canada is apparently seen as kind of a weak player in terms of its national security and foreign and defense policy, because we don't invest a lot in it, right? That apparently Prime Minister Trudeau basically said to our allies that we will never hit the 2% NATO target as a part of our GDP. That is, that doesn't shine well with our allies. Now, that being said, I really do have the impression that when it comes to cyber, Canada does punch above its weight, and we really are there, and we are an active member with our Five Eyes partners. And I have no doubt that if, I don't know if it was the Americans who first discovered this group was planning an attack, or if the Canadians were able to figure it out ourselves. But the fact is, there's a lot of intelligence sharing, there's a lot of cooperation, and I have no doubt that if it came to an attack where we needed the assistance of our allies, that our allies would be there. The other aspects of our foreign policy, maybe we could work on, but in terms of cyber, I mean, not to make Rajiv look too good in this conversation, but I think actually we're doing pretty well.
All right, Rajiv, I am going to ask you, when the Cyber Center is alerted of a potential threat to critical infrastructure, what happens next? Walk us through that.
Yeah, so basically the center learns about threats in a number of different ways, right? So we defend the government of Canada. So sometimes we see threats through our aperture in terms of defending the government of Canada. We are part of CSC. So CSC is actually very good at signals intelligence, and we get a lot of information from our own Canadian intelligence, I will say, as well as through our relationships with our Five Eye partners, which is very strong. And to Stephanie's point earlier, we have a very close relationship on cyber. We work very closely together. I was just on a panel with CISA and the NCSC, which are our two cyber center partners in the US and the UK, and we're basically communicate on a daily basis. So I just wanted to reiterate that that's a really strong partnership. So we get information from our partners. We get information from certs right around the world as well. So we are the National Cert of Canada. So these are other tips that can come in. So lots of different sources of information. And as soon as we get these, it's basically a urgent effort, because this could be ransomware that we've been notified that might be happening on a Canadian or organization or whatnot. So it's critical that we actually reach out to these organizations ASAP, and our folk work like day and night to be able to do this. It's not always easy. Sometimes we have the contacts in place already, as we do with Enbridge and others, where we know the people and we can actually reach out in a very collaborative way. But sometimes it's an organization that we've never worked with before, and we have to reach out a number of different ways and try our best to highlight the urgency and get the right people to actually respond to the incident. And hopefully all the actions get to happen before anything critical takes place. And that does happen quite often. So these are really amazing success stories that you never hear. We're able to prevent these ransomware attacks and others that are there. But it's basically a daily occurrence for the Cyber Center in terms of us, learning of some sort of threat and then doing the urgent job of actually reaching out and notifying our partners to make sure that we can work collaboratively to mitigate. So that's a day in our life.
Now, I do want to ask you a question. It's not a question to pat yourself on the back, essentially, but I want to know response times. Like, how fast can you be alerted of some potential threat, and then say for the sake of this example, we have Enbridge. How fast can we quickly get in contact with Enbridge? How quickly can we sort of negate the potential for an attack?
Yeah, in terms of Enbridge, that could be minutes. That's as good as a chat message or an email over to Bhushan, and then having the teams actually start to work and exchange that actual information. One thing that I will say as well, that in terms of those are the notifications that we put out on a very urgent and timely basis, but on an hourly basis, we're actually automatically sharing threat indicators as well that help people detect threats on their own network. So we have lots of different info sharing techniques and methods that we put on nonstop, whether they're cyber flashes, alerts, publications, these sorts of things. So there's various levels of them, and we make sure that information is flowing nonstop, because that's really the core of having this kind of collaborative defense of the country.
All right, very impressive. Bhushan.
All I can add in, I can confirm that I was on a plane to Idaho, going to the Idaho National Labs, and I got the phone and the text from the Cyber Center, and within seconds after that, because we have a 24/7, 365, monitoring and mitigation capability, we were already mobilized. So I think that a level of connection and information sharing is working quite well.
Bhushan, I want to ask you, Stephanie had touched on it a little bit. There is a difference between gaining access to a company's network and actually disrupting energy supply or causing damage. If hackers do succeed in getting access to our pipeline infrastructure, can you give us a sense what could happen, mild scenario to worst case scenario?
Yeah, I think, this gets into, to point, varying degrees, and maybe, if I step back to just put in context. So, we've seen in the news, right, varying levels of impact when critical infrastructure services are impacted. So, that encompasses healthcare. And the Irish health system, as an example, went through a ransomware attack, and you see, what happened there. So it could be from, people being able to not access the health system or book their appointments, or the energy, the Colonial Pipeline that Stephanie just kind of talked about, what that means in terms of society, or even the critical infrastructure around food supply, right? So when JBS Foods, et cetera, went through. So I think it depends. And I think what really that means is, for us at Enbridge, really underscores the constant ability to not just have our eyes on the landscape of the threat and its sophistication, but also make sure that we're adapting and matching and investing our capabilities to take the appropriate action, be it to identify, be it to detect, be it to prevent, to protect, and also, making sure that we have an appropriate response. So that's the way we think about it, and this includes taking several actions. For example, we continuously test and validate the effectiveness of our controls. We take appropriate architectural decisions around providing layers of defense, so it's not one layer that is compromised that we stop business operations, rather making sure that we have these architectural principles that are sound and are constantly validated. We perform hacking exercises. We hire independent third parties to perform what are called red team and purple team hacking exercises, so we can, again, proactively assess and take actions to mitigate our capability. And then we, of course, do numerous drills around business continuity. So that's a way we think about making sure that we continue to operate the critical infrastructure that is so important for our society and really empowers our society.
Stephanie, best case, worst case scenario. So you touched on it a little bit. What does that look like?
Well, I guess when I first read about this, all I could think about was a disruption to the natural gas supply in February in Canada, which could be very serious. Also, the idea that there could have even been loss of life, right? I mean, people could have potentially have died in an explosion if the original intent or the alleged intent of these attackers had actually gone through, and that's incredibly serious. But the energy, obviously, it's pretty resilient, and we've put a lot of resources in it. The government of Canada itself is also introducing legislation, Bill C-26, which is going to see the introduction of agile cybersecurity standards to make sure that more players are also keeping up in the way that, say, Enbridge says it is, which is great. But it really could be a very just from an actual loss of life perspective, that would have been bad. The idea that our energy might have, I don't know which companies. So if it was a major company or versus a small company, that would have had an impact on potentially the natural gas in Canada, which, to a certain extent, we also are under a pressure from our allies to start exporting more. And then also, I think the diplomatic signal this says. I mean, we have to understand cyber attacks as a language, right? When Russia was attacking Ukraine's energy grid, with Black Energy back in a few years ago, this wasn't just like a way to punish Ukraine. It was a way to also communicate with them, to inculcate a sense of helplessness. And so there's these diplomatic costs as well. And this is why I think it is important for, Canada to take this seriously and to, respond in a way that I think is appropriate, which might be some kind of, say, cyber attribution or, working with our allies to call out this kind of behavior. I don't know if we would go so far as to actually respond in some kind of way, but certainly things like increased sanctions or targeting other individuals, indicting them with criminal offenses for having done this. These are all things that we have seen our allies do, and these are things that I think Canada should be doing as well.
I want to stick with you. There's something sort of unique in this situation. When these hacks happen, we sometimes don't know who's behind them, but that's not the case in this attack. How come?
I actually think we often do know, but we don't necessarily want to attribute for a number of reasons. One is that it can be hard to do an attribution, right? When you can look at the kind of software and malware programs that these hackers are using, and often there's traces of them that can identify who these actors actually are. If it's a new group, it might take some time. It might not be possible. But I would actually say probably in more cases rather than not, we probably can, but we don't always choose to do so. And there have been a number of attacks in Canada recently where we have not seen attribution. So, for example, we believe, it's never been, I believe, confirmed by the government, that there was a devastating ransomware attack against the Newfoundland healthcare system, for example. That has never been attributed. Global Affairs Canada was hacked last year in the run-up to the Russia's invasion of Ukraine. That has never been attributed, and in fact, never been identified. We really haven't learned much about that attack at all. And then we have this particular attack, which, you know, we've only really learned about because of the leak of intelligence by a very misguided 21-year-old in the in the Air Force National Guard in the United States. So, you know, it's hard to say. It is ultimately not the decision of the Cyber Center to make these attributions. It's ultimately a diplomatic decision. It's a decision that has to be taken by politicians. But I think it's important to do these attributions simply because, you know, it calls out bad behavior. If a state's doing something that is ultimately going to be harmful, not just for Canada, but for other states who may see this kind of attack and want to replicate it, that's an important thing to call out. You know, and as Rajiv said earlier, the NotPetya attack, you know, affected, I think, 60 countries. You know, when these attacks happen, they can be used really irresponsibly. So Canada, as, you know, a country that often likes to describe itself as supporting the rule of law, this is something we absolutely should be doing. And like I said, it's, you know, while in some very minimal cases it might be hard to identify who these actors are, I do think ultimately, you know, Canada is pretty good at figuring out and working with our allies and trying to see who, in fact, is doing these attacks.
Rajiv, you get the last question here. How can oil and gas companies bolster their protection against state-sponsored cyber threats, Russian or otherwise?
Yeah, so I mean, it was nice to hear, you know, the steps that Bhushan was taking at Enbridge. Those are excellent steps, and it's amazing that, you know, we have organizations that are building that resilience into their program. From our side, we always say, you know, start with some of the basics, and that's, you know, patching your internet-facing applications and making sure that they won't be exploited by those, you know, common vulnerabilities that are out there. Strengthening your administrative privileges and your identity system. So multi-factor authentication is fantastic, and making sure that you're zoning your networks properly so that, you know, those operational technology services aren't exposed to the internet and are sequestered in a much more secure zone. So the threat actors get into the network, they don't get to those critical systems that can actually cause physical damage, right? So those are the basics right there. Having an incident response plan. You know, that's for some organizations don't, usually the smaller ones, but at the same point in time, very important. And then when you get into ransomware and these sorts of things, you know, being able to back up your data appropriately and store it in a secure spot so that you're not at the mercy of the ransomware cyber criminals that are going to want to try to extort you for money, and making sure that you're in a good response and recovery position should something happen. And so cyber resilience is really what we preach. And that's basically being able to prevent, detect, respond, and recovery. No one's going to be perfect, but being resilient is really the important element.
All right, we are going to leave it there. Rajiv, Bhushan, Stephanie, thank you so much. Really appreciate you taking the time.
Great. Thank you, Jen.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.
With thousands of in-depth interviews and discussions, The Agenda's YouTube channel delivers context for virtually any topic you're interested in. Check out our latest videos and playlists at youtube.com/theagenda. And make sure to hit the subscribe button to get notified about all our new conversations. It's all available at youtube.com/theagenda. One way to look at it is that goods we need are cheap and easily replaced when they wear out. Another way to look at it is, why is so much of what we buy so poorly made or effectively disposable? And how could it possibly be sustainable? Joining us now on all of that from London, Ontario, Alyssa Centovani, professor in the Faculty of Information and Media Studies at Western University and an expert on the right to repair. And on the line in the provincial capital, Kelly Drennan, founding executive director of Fashion Takes Action. Welcome to you both, and thank you so much for joining me on the program tonight. To understand how we got here, I think we do need to take a little trip back in time, about mid-1700s to late 1700s. That is the Industrial Revolution. Kelly, some experts blame the Industrial Revolution for the decline of clothing quality. What role did it play?
Well, I don't know that it went back that far, but definitely once we started seeing plastic being used, that is definitely when we saw the decline in clothing. Synthetic fibers used to make things like polyester, spandex, acrylic, nylon, that actually is all derived from crude oil. So it's all plastic that we're wearing. And it's a lot cheaper to purchase yarn or fabric made from synthetics than it is to, say, buy wool or linen or cotton or silk.
Of course, we know this term fast fashion, and I'm curious, you have the inside track in looking at how, materials are made. And I'm curious, are clothing manufacturers intentionally making their products less durable so people have to buy more?
Well, that's a pretty scary thought, but, and I wouldn't blanket the whole industry for, saying that they're doing that, but there are certainly some brands, without naming names, that are in that ultra fast fashion category, that are selling products that are, $5 and less. So not only, are those clothing going to be, made from, obsolescence, designed with obsolescence in mind, but it's also a matter of, what's the environmental impact? What's the social impact? There's absolutely no way somebody was paid to make that garment.
Alyssa, I want to change over and talk about tech. The lifespan of tech products, has it become shorter over time? I feel like I've had conversations with colleagues and friends who have said, I just bought a dryer, a washer and dryer, and it's only lasted me 2 years, or some sort of tech device. It just seems everyone has an anecdotal story. Is that the case?
That's so true, and I hear that as well in my research. Yeah, what this is dealing with is this idea of planned obsolescence, which is that manufacturers are increasingly sort of designing in death dates into the products that they manufacture, or prematurely shortening the useful life of the products that they make. And this is a common tactic that manufacturers use to increase profits by, accelerating turnover, by generating new sales, or if they're a manufacturer that's managed to capture the downstream repair market by sort of forcing repairs earlier than they might otherwise be necessary.
Let's talk a little bit about a death date. I think when you say that, the first thing I think of is a best before date. How does that compare?
Yeah, so I mean, a best before date is like used on sort of consumables like food. We're concerned there with safety. That doesn't really apply in the tech space. So the death date here is really just about manufacturers sort of figuring out, how quickly they can degrade the quality of a product, whether that's through, a battery lifespan declining, or if it's a technology that's sort of connected to the Internet of Things. Manufacturers can actually, reach out to your device in your home and stop it from working. And so safety here is not really a concern. It's really fundamentally about increasing profits.
And on the topic of planned obsolescence, how prevalent is it? Are there a few bad players, or is this an industry-wide problem in the tech industry?
So I would say that it's pretty prevalent. I wouldn't say that every single manufacturer is guilty of this practice, but I think that the vast majority are. What I'm interested in, and what I've been starting to see, particularly in companies located in Europe, is that some manufacturers are seeing a benefit to distinguishing themselves on the marketplace by making products that are more durable, that last longer, that are more repairable. And so we can look to companies like Framework, which makes laptops, and Fairphone, which makes cell phones, for some, I would say, positive or optimistic signs. These products are not yet available in North America, but hopefully they'll be here soon.
All right. Kelly, I want to talk a little bit about the relationship between consumers and companies. Do consumers dictate how companies manufacture their products, or do companies dictate how we purchase clothing?
Well, yeah, it's a little bit chicken and egg. Voting with our dollar, right? So however we choose to spend our money will actually dictate to industry showing demand for certain products. And so when we go out there and buy all this fast fashion. If we see something that's $9.99 and we buy 4 of them, we're programmed to sort of look for these deals, and we get that hit of like that dopamine hit when we do. So that definitely sends a message to the industry. But at the same time, the industry is overproducing. There's 100 billion new garments made every single year. So that's actually 15 garments per person on the planet every single year. And today we actually buy 60% more clothes than we did just 20 years ago.
Wow.
And we keep them for half as long. And a lot of that is driven by this planned obsolescence for sure. Like the quality of these garments has totally degraded. And after a few washes or wears, they fall apart. Or because of really fast trend turnarounds, they're constantly being dictated to us. What's in this season is out next season. And so to keep up with the Joneses, we constantly have to be buying products. So it's this sort of, endless loop or cycle of overproduction and overconsumption.
Alyssa, talk to me a little bit about the right to repair. What is that?
Sure. So the right to repair is a social movement that seeks to sort of reclaim our right to fix the things that we own. The sort of principal demands that right to repair advocates are making is that manufacturers need to make their products fixable, that they need to make replacement parts and specialized tools available, and also that they need to make the information resources like manuals, guides, schematics that one would need to have access to be able to make repairs available as well.
And give us some examples of in what ways companies are impeding the repair of some of their products?
Yeah, so there are a number of ways that companies are impeding repair of their products. And I guess I would start by saying repair is being impeded sort of across sectors. So it certainly is being impeded in the context of consumer goods and consumer products, but it's also being impeded in other industries as well. So in terms of agricultural equipment, it's being impeded in terms of medical devices and equipment, in terms of automotive, in terms of even, military defense equipment. So the right to repair is being impeded sort of across the board. And in terms of the sort of specific ways in which it's being impeded, in my work, I talk about sort of 6 big categories or ways that that manufacturers are impeding. One way is through design choices. So design can either, promote repairability or undermine it. So we can think about, our cars have a hood that lets us have access to the engine. Our smartphones don't, right? So fixing the screen on our smartphone when it breaks is typically expensive and inconvenient, even though that this is a really common point of breakage. Another way in which repair is impeded is through sort of economic means. And here I'm mostly talking about the ways in which manufacturers or companies will sort of incentivize replacement over repair using kind of like very sophisticated and savvy pricing models. Material asymmetries or like those restrictions on access to replacement parts and tools is another way that it's impeded. Similarly, restricting access to those informational resources I was mentioning is another way. And then laws are also major impediments, in particular intellectual property law, copyright law, competition law, and then at the provincial level, contract law. And then finally, various social factors. So a little bit of what Kelly was talking about in terms of our own sort of motivations for consuming or repairing.
Yeah, it's interesting. I just wanted to jump off that with respect to repair, because unlike tech, the average person with clothing should be able to do their own repairs. But the problem here is that a lot of us don't really know how to do that anymore. We have a school program. We go into the classrooms and we ask young people, show of hands, how many of you know how to use a needle and thread? And very few of them will actually put up their hand. And so when it comes to clothing, if you think about a garment that you spent $10 on, the cost to repair that garment, if you were to take it to a professional, could be 2-3 times what you paid for that garment.
I'm going to pick up on your point as well, Kelly. And I want to ask you, there was a time when people would get their clothing custom made at a tailor. Then department stores took over and you could buy your suits and dresses off the rack. They're mass produced. And then now we're in a digital sphere. Things are online. How much do companies get away from the fact that we actually don't see our products, touch our products, and in a way, do they get away with giving us sort of a lesser quality material?
Absolutely. I think if you are familiar with a brand, say before this sort of rise of online shopping, then you actually, your fit, you can rely on the quality of the garment. But there's a lot of new online only fast fashion brands. And yes, you absolutely don't really know what you're buying. Not only do you not know the quality of it, but you really don't even know the fit. And the problem there from the environmental perspective is that a lot of companies are offering free shipping. And so what we're seeing is people buying their 2 or 3 different sizes and then sending back the ones that don't fit and keeping the one that does. But the problem is the ones that don't fit and that get sent back are actually going into the landfill. They're not going back onto the shelves because the cost to restock that item is actually higher than the value of the garment itself.
You talk about cost. Inflation is high right now, and well-made clothing is not cheap. It's quite expensive. Kelly, is there a way to shop sustainably and be on a budget?
100%. Yeah. I mean, going out and buying something new and that was sustainably made, definitely you're going to be paying a premium because it represents the true cost of that garment. The best thing is, I love saying this, is that the most sustainable garment is the one that's actually already in your closet. So before you actually go out and buy something, take a look, what's in your closet already? We wear 20% of our closet 80% of the time. So there's 80% sitting in that closet that you barely ever wear. So that's the first thing that we should be doing. And then we have something called the 7 R's that we've created. Everybody knows the 3 R's of reduce, reuse, recycle. We've inserted a few more to help consumers really think about how they can be sustainable or circular when it comes to their wardrobe. And so reusing clothes is the second best thing to reducing. And that means buying secondhand, donating, going to a clothing swap, all of that is very affordable compared to buying new. And then also repair is another R. Rent is another great way, especially for a special occasion where you're maybe going to wear something once. Why not rent it for a fraction of the cost? And repurpose is another great way to take an old garment and turn it into something new on a budget. So definitely a lot of ways that you can be sustainable without having to go out and buy something new.
All right. We talked about copyright laws. Alyssa, there aren't any right to repair laws in Canada, but there are 2 bills under consideration. Bill C-244 and Bill C-294. They're both private members' bills that amend portions of the Copyright Act to allow the circumvention of technological protection measures. Bill C-244 would allow the circumvention for diagnosis, maintenance, and repair, and Bill C-294 allows circumvention for interoperability. Now, Alyssa, would these bills ultimately give consumers the right to repair?
Yeah, that's a great question. So these I see these bills as being really good steps in the right direction. Particularly with Bill C-244, I think that's a great bill in terms of sort of providing a wide berth for repair activities, and interoperability relates to repair, but actually I think has benefits that extend far beyond repair as well. So these are great bills. What I would say is that, the impediments to repair, like I mentioned earlier, have some legal elements, but they have, lots of elements as well that are unrelated. So even if we just sort of stick to the legal context, we would also need to really see some changes made to competition law. A lot of what we're seeing now that is a restriction on repair is really fundamentally a kind of anti-competitive behavior that copyright law is not really well suited to be able to ameliorate. In addition, we have issues around things like licenses, terms of use, warranties, which fall under provincial jurisdiction. And so what I would say is these bills are great. the federal government should sort of make a clear stand that these are important priorities. I would like to see follow-up with competition law, and then that would sort of, I think, enable the provinces to make some positive changes at the provincial level as well.
All right, we have less than a minute left, and I have one question for both of you. Kelly, start off with you. How can consumers take back control when it comes to their purchasing decisions and taking care of their items?
Well, I think the first part is to, do your research when you're actually buying something. Look into the company and make sure that, if they have sustainability claims, that they actually can back those claims up. Read the reviews of other customers about the products. And then, in terms of taking care of our items, getting to stains right away, not overwashing our clothes, because every time we wash them, the friction will actually wear the fabric down. It'll fade the color. So there's lots of things that we can be doing to just keep our clothes in use for as long as possible. And ultimately, that's going to be the best from an economic perspective too.
Alyssa, you get the last word.
Great. Yeah, I would say that, it's important for consumers to be more cognizant maybe of their habits of consumption, maybe pause before they buy that sort of sophisticated, high-tech computerized thing, which will generally be less repairable. There's also a lot of local grassroots efforts in many locations throughout Canada and elsewhere, like repair cafes and thing libraries. And these are great ways to sort of become engaged in the community. But I would also say that, the issues underlying the problems that we're talking about here are not going to be solved, I think, through individual action. These are really collective problems. And so I don't want to sort of emphasize too much the responsibility of individual consumers. I think that what we need to do is sort of advocate for political and policy changes that will help support a more sort of systemic kind of solution to these problems.
All right, we are going to leave it there. Alyssa, Kelly, thank you so much for your time. Learned a lot. The one takeaway from me is I definitely need to go learn how to sew a button. So that's the first stop. Thank you so much. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
History is written in textbooks, displayed in museums, passed down in family stories. But it's also buried and marked with headstones if you know where to look. Or in this case, aim to restore what's been overlooked. Rochelle Bush is a historian and co-lead on the Salem Chapel Underground Railroad Cemetery project, and she joins us now on the line from St. Catharines to explain. Welcome to the program.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, so in communities including Niagara-on-the-Lake and Canfield, which is just south of Hamilton, historians are working to recognize Ontario's early Black history through restoring and protecting burial grounds. Tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing in St. Catharines.
So that's a great question, and thank you. In St. Catharines, I have a co-partner, Adam Montgomery, and under the auspices of the Salem Chapel BME Church, which is affectionately known as the Harriet Tubman Church, we're working on the Victoria Lawn Underground Railroad Cemetery project. So it's a walking tour that we're trying to implement in Victoria Lawn. So it began because we conduct tours in Victoria Lawn Cemetery, and the main person there, the main attraction, is Reverend Anthony Burns. But there's other people that are buried out at the cemetery, such as Harriet Tubman's descendants, some of her nieces, and other historic figures. So we want to embrace that and make it a larger tour.
Tell us a little bit about some of the early Black settlers buried in the Victoria Lawn Cemetery. You named a few, including, of course, a descendant of Harriet Tubman's, but tell us a little bit about the Reverend as well.
Okay, so Reverend Anthony Burns, his escape from Virginia in 1854 in May incited the largest abolitionist revolt in U.S. history. So again, he's part of the Niagara Freedom Trail, so he's the main attraction at Victoria Lawn Cemetery. So when he was captured in Boston or arrested, he was returned to enslavement, and from there, it incited the largest abolitionist revolt. So his Friends of the Baptist Faith purchased his freedom, and then he eventually made his way to St. Catharines in 1860.
All right, I do have a photo. This is a photo of the grave marker for Amanda Stewart Gales Taylors, and this is a before and after of what your team had recovered. who is she and how did you find her stone? Because there's an amazing story here, because the photo of the before, I'm seeing roots. I'm seeing essentially the bottom of a tree. This was buried underground. Tell me about the story of how you uncovered this tombstone.
So we did a lot of research at Victoria Lawn Cemetery in order to find a lot of the people that are buried there. And with the Ontario Genealogical Society records, we had to cross-reference the location of where the folks are buried, because Amanda Gale Taylor's, so it's Amanda Stewart Gales Taylor's, she was actually documented as being in an unmarked grave. So after doing all the research and thinking that we located her, we had an expert come in who probed and actually found her gravesite. So that was a eureka moment, because Amanda Stewart Gales Taylor is a niece of Harriet Tubman's.
That is very, very neat. Now, I have another photo. This is a picture of cemetery restoration expert Al Ernest in the corner there working on his stone. He's using a brush. He's got a brush in his hand. This is Henry Ballard's stone. Tell us, what does your team do with the stones once they are recovered? Because this is a very delicate process. This isn't something that, hey, there's a stone and you pull it out. To walk us through sort of that process.
Yes, and you're absolutely right, Jan. It is a delicate process. So what Al was doing is he was cleaning off the stone just to make sure we had the correct stone. And then what he will do is remove the stone, clean it, and then stand it upright again in its base area. So that's what he was doing. And just to give you a little bit of background about Henry Ballard, he was one of the original 5 trustees who purchased the BME property, which was formerly the AME Church in St. Catharines.
All right. I do have a question about finances. Who pays for this work? Because it is very tedious work. It does take a lot of time. Is this the municipality? Is this money out of your own pockets? How does it work?
So that's a great question as well. We have a GoFundMe going. So private donors are helping us with this restoration project. So no funding is coming from the city. No funding is coming from the province. No government institutions. It's all private donors who are paying for this.
Explain that to me. Is there normally funding and money that goes towards keeping burial sites sort of pristine and sort of walkable and for people to actually visit? Or is this, because this is sort of a new project, that there is no funding behind it?
Exactly. So because it's a new project, there's no funding behind it. But the cemetery, of course, because it's a municipal cemetery, the city maintains the actual cemetery. But for something that we're doing, it would have to come out of our own pocket.
All right. Now, it's been over 150 years since the cemetery opened. Why do you think this is the first restoration project dedicated to prominent Black individuals buried here?
Okay, great question, Jan. To be honest, nobody was interested in the past, except us, except Black folks. And it was actually me. And, you know, I don't want to take all the credit for it, or don't want to sit here and act like I'm tooting my own horn. But I just wanted to amplify the people that were in Victoria Lawn Cemetery for tourism. So primarily for tourism, even though the cemetery is a sacred destination where people go and they reflect about the past and about their loved ones, I wanted to add more to the tourism trail. So that's exactly why we're doing it from my perspective, as well as honoring and the sacred memory of the people that are buried there, because they are courageous freedom seekers.
You know, just off the top, I had mentioned Niagara-on-the-Lake, efforts also in Canfield. Is there a collective or a push more and more to understand and remember our early Black settler communities across Ontario? Is this seen as a collective? Was there inspiration from other projects that you were hearing, or is this sort of individuals just taking it upon themselves and groups kind of pushing forward?
Well, pretty much it's individuals taking it upon themselves and pushing forward. I can't say that we all know each other, but we all know of each other. But a lot of it stems from Northern Ontario as well as Southwestern Ontario. So the folks out there preserving grave sites, or doing the best that they can to ask the agencies to protect the grave sites. So here in Niagara, it's individuals doing it on their own, as well as out in Canfield.
You have a family connection to one of the early settlers buried in Victoria Lawn. This is a photo of your great-great-grandmother, Margaret Harper's tombstone. Tell us a little bit about what it's like to have an ancestor buried there, someone that you haven't met, but there is that deep, deep connection. And obviously with the work that you're doing to preserve it, what is it like to have someone there?
Oh, it's an honor for me to have an ancestor buried in Victoria Lawn Cemetery because it is such a historic cemetery. So for me to go out there and reflect, and yes, Margaret Harper is my great grandmother, but then also her children are buried out there as well. So I have my ancestors there. And what's important about Margaret is she was the first lady at the Salem Chapel BME Church for a period of time when her husband, my 2 times great-grandfather, Reverend James Harper, was the minister in charge at the Salem Chapel when Harriet Tubman was attending the church. But for me, I go out there, and I go out there quite frequently. I'm not going to, lie about that. Maybe twice a week, just to reflect on everything that took place in Victoria Lawn Cemetery and who's actually buried there, because I just marvel at it.
All right, in the last minute that we have, I do want to ask, you mentioned off the top sort of the ultimate goal here is these walking tours. You already do these walking tours, but once you've restored these stones, that walking tour in the cemetery itself, tell us a little bit about it and the ultimate goal of the whole project here.
Okay, so the ultimate goal of the whole project is to provide a free public walking tour for those who are interested. More importantly, it's to remember those people who are actually buried there. Because with regards to the freedom seekers, they went through the horrors and hardships of enslavement. Many separated from their families, and they made the decision to flee to Canada, so to this British colony, and settle here in St. Catharines. So just understanding that fact that they were enslaved and then they had to escape from enslavement to make it to Canada and then establish a new life all over again, and that they're buried at Victoria Lawn Cemetery. That's amazing. It's remarkable that, folks could actually do that, because today, how many of us would be able to meet that challenge?
That's true. Rochelle, we are going to leave it there. Thank you so much for your great story, and thank you so much for what you do. Really appreciate you taking the time on our program.
Thank you, and thank you for having me.
That is the agenda for Thursday, April 20th, 2023. Tomorrow, Steve Paikin's conversation with journalist and author Jonathan Friedland about his book that chronicles the astonishing efforts of one man to escape Auschwitz to sound the alarm about the death camps. I'm Jay Jaganathan. Thanks for watching TVO, for joining us online at tvo.org, and we will see you again tomorrow.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.